To convince, manipulating words is not enough. Constant repetition of the same sentences on Russian expansionism and despotism eventually becomes boring. Construction of the discourse is thus a necessary stage, but it is not sufficient. To be effective and widespread, a narrative must also be elaborated, a story narrated that makes sense. An easy myth must be fabricated that will lodge in the collective imagination. Construction of a Russophobic narrative is thus infinitely complex. More than a narrative, it is a meta-narrative, as language analysts call it. That is, a narrative within a narrative, a history within history, which interlocks and gets tangled like Russian nesting dolls. One fact leads to another, one event to a series of events, one opinion to other opinions in other times, other cultures on other continents. But always those stories are linked to the West, to Europe and the United States. This agglomeration of tales ends up forming a hyperfiction and generating a new mythology, that of the fierce Russian bear, always ready to charge out of its forests to devour the Little Red Riding Hood of the West. As in every good myth, there must be an ogre, a villain ready to demolish the innocent, which hopefully will come to a bad end. Fabricating a villain, Vladimir Putin in this case, is thus essential to the smooth functioning of the myth. This myth has a function, anthropologists say. It is to substitute the truth to better calm apprehensions and provide explanations that bring back tranquility. Literally, a meta-narrative is a narrative on reality whose function is to justify the past and the present. It is a hyper-discourse which deploys legitimizing functions in politics, functions destined to edify collective values by way of the identity unit. It is a unifying discourse, able to inscribe innovations in a teleological perspective and to point to criteria for life in common. In a way, the construction of a monumental history that ceaselessly turns the present and the future into the past in order to maintain the, actually dead, political identity. Therefore, the meta-narrative places us at the heart of myths and rituals in which and through which politics becomes creed, ceremony, and symbolic spread to the detriment of citizens' accountability. Indeed, by including various myths, the meta-narrative tries to transform the current situation. But to do that, the meta-narrative must also transform the past. This explains why the dominant Russophobic discourse is so eager to rewrite history. The main mission of memory occultation is to wipe out any traces of the positive historical role of Russia in Europe, and thus clear the deck for the postmodern mythology of a united Atlanticist Europe centered around a Warsaw, Berlin, Brussels, Paris, London, Washington axis. As was done with Byzantium in the days of Charlemagne and the first Roman Germanic emperors backed by the Pope's theologians, it is a matter of wiping Russia as European out of the European consciousness. Europe's unity and future demand it, at least so say the modern theologians building the myth of Euro-Atlantic Union by opposing to it the myth of the threatening Russian bear. Seen from that perspective, the systematic interpretation of Russian actions in terms of threats to the West is better understood. In that construction, every detail, every micro-event must be carefully fit into the huge anti-Russian interpretative grid. Putin's briefest statement, the briefest separatist shellfire, the Greek prime minister's meeting with a Russian ambassador, a pro-Western opponent's most insignificant tweet, all of this must be analyzed, taken apart, reformatted, and eventually amplified to enhance the huge and moving picture of the horrors that Russia prepares, with a view to compromising the glorious edification of a Euro-Atlantic Union determined to build peace, democracy, and its people's prosperity forever and ever.